Guys, my name is Ankush Gaurav and I welcome you to Contour series. In the previous tutorials, I talked about how to use model attribute annotation on a method argument, as well as how to use model attribute annotation on a method like this. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to talk about some of the advanced level data binding features which you may make use of while using model attribute annotation on a method argument. So let's start. Guys, in the previous tutorial, I explained very clearly about the reason why I used model attribute annotation on a method argument like this, that is on the student object. Mainly I used it for two reasons sake. First reason is it will automatically bind all request parameters or form elements submitted by the user with the corresponding properties of the student object. And the second reason is in the corresponding JSP file for this request handler method, that is an admissionsuccess.jsp file, I can use this student object by simply referring to this key like this. This is a kind of wonderful feature which is provided by Spring MVC. Along with this, I also showed you very clearly about what extra lines of code you might have to write in this request handler method if you would not prefer using model attribute annotation on the student object like this. All these concepts which I'm summarizing now in short, I covered in detail in the previous tutorials by explaining how to use model attribute annotation on a method argument. Now the point to note here is if you look at the admission form.jsp file, it has got two form elements, student name and student hobby, which are of type text. Now when the user enters values in both these form elements and submits this form on the browser, the request will reach to this request handler method, and this model attribute annotation would automatically bind the values of both these form elements with the corresponding properties of the student object which are having string as a data type. Now this is an important thing to note here. Up till now I showed you this auto data binding feature working with the properties of the student class having string as a data type. But Spring MVC has not restricted this auto data binding feature with only string type properties, but has provided this feature with any other data type which you may provide here with the properties like int, date, long, decimal, integer, any collection object like Arraylist, set, or any user defined type. Alright, let me explain you what I'm really talking about here by including few more properties in this student class and also making all related changes in the admission form.jsp file and admissionsuccess.jsp file, and later I'll explain everything to you in detail. Alright, so here I've made changes in all three files, that is in student.java file, admissionsuccess.jsp file, and admissionform.jsp file. Now let me explain you in detail what I've really added in all these three files. In the admissionform.jsp file, I've added these three form elements, that is student mobile, student date of birth, and student skills, of which these two elements are of type text and this third element is of type multiple select box. In the student class, I've added the corresponding properties, that is student mobile, student date of birth, and student skills, which are of type long, date, and Arraylist, along with the getters and setters methods here. And in the admissionsuccess.jsp file, I've added this code snippet so as to display the user entered values for student mobile, student date of birth, and student skills with all other existing form elements values on the admission success web page post admission form web page submission on the browser by the user. Guys, let me show you this application running on the browser, and consequently I'll explain more about the changes which I've just made in this application. Now, after all these modifications, when the user types this URL on the browser and hits enter, my application will send this form as a response back to him. He will fill all required values. Say for name he's entering Mr. AB6Z, for hobby he's putting music, for mobile he's putting this number, for date of birth he's putting 2010-10-10, and in the select box he can select any required values. So I'm selecting here Spring MVC and Spring code. Now when the user submits this form here on the browser, the request will reach to this request handler method, and here this model attribute annotation on the student object will automatically bind all these form elements values with the corresponding properties of the student object without you bothering on how it would bind the incoming form data with any of the particular type of the corresponding property. It's a great feature. And then after this auto data binding task, which is performed by this model attribute annotation here, Spring MVC would make a call to admission success.jsp file for producing the final response with this code. Alright, let me show you this on the browser by submitting this form. Cool, my application sent back this web page as a response, which is as expected by us. Guys, in this tutorial I showed you some of the most fundamental auto data binding features provided by Spring MVC by including many properties in this student class having different data types. Now, if you don't want to use this auto data binding feature by simply not using this model attribute annotation on the student object, you don't use it. But in that case, you would have to write many extra lines of code in this method, and this request handler method would probably look like this. So if you're not using model attribute annotation on the student object like I showed you before, then probably you have to write all these lines of code in this request handler method manually. So I would always suggest you to go ahead with using model attribute annotation on the student object like this, so as to use all advanced level data binding features provided by Spring MVC. Guys, so far in this demo, I showed you this feature working with built-in data types like long, string, date, etc. and a collection object Arraylist. Now in the next tutorial, I'll show you this feature working with the user-defined type which is present in the student class, along with looking at the concept of catching binding errors. Guys, a big thank you for liking all of my tutorials on Spring MVC series. Your continuous interaction with me is making me upload more and more such tutorials, so please keep it up by providing your valuable feedback and comments using the comment section below the video, or simply writing to me on this email ID for all of your queries. Please hit the like button if you really like the video, and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Contour series, and I'm gonna catch you in my next tutorial.